Hello and welcome to the Trust and Influence in B2B podcast. I'm your host, Joel Harrison. As the title suggests, this podcast is a broad remit covering the evolving challenges associated with generating trust, influencing buyers in all areas of B2B. These are perennially challenges, but they've taken on new urgency and resonance in a changing landscape. Episodes are released weekly, so please don't forget to subscribe, like, or rate this episode of podcast, generally speaking. It really means a lot to me, and it's really helpful in terms of understanding who's listening, what they're liking. So in this podcast, we're going to talk about the importance of internal influences in purchasing decisions in complex B2B organizations and the power of thought leadership to reach them. We know that the decision-making in B2B organizations can be complex and multifaceted, with many different types of individuals playing a role in the ultimate decision. Some of these are clear and obvious marketing targets, but others are likely to play a variety of roles, some being visible and tangible to vendors, and others remaining under the radar or unidentifiable. That's easy for me to say. So with me to discuss the findings of Edelman's latest research into thought leadership amongst this group is Annie Dunleavy, who is EVP of the agency's Content Strategy. Annie, welcome.
Thanks so much for having me, Joel. It's really great to be here.
So thanks so much for being here. Really fascinated by this report. I spoke to Andrew Mildren in your UK office a couple of times about this, and I've been focusing a lot on thought leadership. So really excited to unpick the kind of what you've discovered in this report. So the report reveals that over 40% of B2B deals stall due to internal misalignment. Can you explain how internal influencers, those stakeholders who aren't primary users of a product or service but do wield significant influence, actually contribute to this challenge?
Sure, definitely. So the idea of buying committees is really well known in B2B. I think we're all very familiar with that concept, but what's actually less understood is the makeup of those groups. So there's a piece of research that was conducted by LinkedIn and Bain last year, actually, that showed that buying committees are composed of two equally influential groups. The first is target buyers, and you mentioned this group, Joel. So these are the people who would directly use the product or service being purchased. And the second is hidden buyers, and these are stakeholders from other parts of the organization, like procurement, could be in finance, could be in legal, maybe even operations. And what jumped out to us from that research is that these hidden buyers hold 50% of the decision-making power within the buying group, yet they're actually often, very often overlooked by marketing and sales efforts. And that really was the jumping off point for our 2025 B2B Thought Leadership Report. How do you reach these hidden buyers? And is thought leadership content an effective way to do so? And that's really what we set out to uncover in this year's report.
And it's interesting, it's terminology. I mean, we don't want to go down too far down the rabbit hole in this one, but I think there are people who are hidden and there are people who are known but not necessarily hidden. So we can call them we call it hidden buyers, we call them internal influencers. What they're doing essentially is contributing to a decision, but perhaps not directly, and they're not actually involved in that kind of usage capacity. And it could be a nebulous group as well, right? Couldn't it? It could be very senior people, or it could be people that are a bit more junior in the organisation, but who've got considerable clout. And you'd hope in a progressive organisation that managers and buyers would be listening to the people who've got stake in the purchase that you're making, but those people might not be quite on the radar as others might be. So
yeah, absolutely. And I think what you're seeing is that buyer groups are getting, increasingly large, and they're including, many more stakeholders than they have in the past, I think, in an effort to kind of mitigate risk. And so as the buyer group continues to grow, you have stakeholders in perhaps more far-flung areas of the organization than you have in the past that you kind of need to bring into the fold and are, really part of the decision-making process, whether as a final decision maker, an influencer on those decisions, someone who's impacted by them. So interesting time in the evolution of buyer groups, for sure.
Yeah, we're all hedging our bets and passing on, deferring responsibility or
right.
Collective decision making. Okay, so your research showed that these internal influencers consume just as much thought leadership as formal decision makers, which is 64% versus 63%. I don't know which one was which, but let's face it, there's not much in there, is there? So what does this tell us about how B2B marketers should be thinking about their content strategy or their thought leadership strategy more specifically, because content marketing and thought leadership aren't the same things, and the audience segmentation as well?
Absolutely. So we were actually kind of surprised to find that hidden buyers, or these internal influencers, consume just as much thought leadership as target buyers. And, what's even sort of more than that is they actually use it to the same degree to vet potential vendors. And what this means for marketers is that they need to think more broadly about who they're speaking to in their thought leadership content than perhaps they have in the past, right? So it's not enough for them to focus only on the people who will actually use the product or service. Because for hidden buyers, you need to create content that shows you understand their business's challenges and needs, that you understand the broader business landscape, because that's the kind of thinking they want to see. They want to understand the kind of thinking that your company can deliver. And that's the kind of content that's going to resonate with them at the end of the day.
Yeah, and presumably that I understand that context, but from multiple standpoints, isn't it? Because you could just take it, there's a danger if you assume it's taking it from a very senior C-suite perspective. That's not going to be what someone further down the organization or with a very specific functional requirement necessarily wants. So I guess it's a more rounded perspective on these things.
That's exactly it. It's thinking in a broader way about who's reading your content. It's not just about showing your technical know-how and showing you know, speeds and feeds or technical specs or however you want to phrase it, but making sure that you're thinking more broadly about what you're saying. You're giving a broader set of perspectives that will appeal to a wider array of stakeholders with a wider set of priorities. And that could be in terms of seniority. It could be in terms of job function. It could be in terms of a whole host of things, but just kind of widening the aperture a bit in terms of thinking who you're creating content for and how you get your content to those people.
Brilliant. Okay. So another great stat from your report, it actually shows that 86% of internal influencers want provocative ideas that challenge assumptions rather than content that validates existing thinking. This is a big issue across B2B marketing, right? Why do you think these stakeholders are more open to disruptive perspectives than we might conventionally expect?
Definitely. It's actually really interesting because hidden buyers, many of them at least, are in roles that actually kind of require them to be a bit risk averse. So these are folks in procurement, legal, operations, finance, etc. But they're also smart, engaged members of the buying committee who really want to make sure their company is choosing the right vendor and that they're choosing the right vendor not just for now, but sort of longer term into the future as well. So for that reason, that 86% you mentioned, Joel, told us that they want ideas that help them think about things in new ways rather than just sort of check boxes. And that signals that they want to hear from vendors that know where the industry is going and that ultimately have the chops to kind of help them uncover challenges or needs that they themselves may not even have recognized. So thought leadership is a tool to help you as an organization do that.
And there's another dimension to this as well, isn't there? Because we're in this AI era, right, where so much content is getting created by AI without human, and AI will often, unless it's prompted, briefed very well, will come up with quite predictable things, as everyone ends up standing the same. So, we know we shouldn't be doing that. Yes, it's very tempting, and your data's showing there's a very, very, very good reason why we shouldn't be doing it, because it just doesn't work. Yeah,
and I think as AI is used increasingly for content creation, the bar is getting even higher to stand out from all of that. There's a glut of thought leadership content out there. There's a glut of product-focused content that is sort of being used as thought leadership content, but that's a very different thing. So, there's, there's many ways to kind of create content that stands out from the crowd, and it always pays to create something that says something different from what everyone else is saying. Because that's going to make your brand stand out at the end of the day. And that's what you want. That's what good content can really, do for an organization.
Yeah, absolutely. I really feel like thought leadership has to be that content which is really kind of landmark and differentiated. Otherwise, well, what's the point?
Right.
So let's talk about access. So 71% of internal influencers say they have little or no interaction with sales team, yet 95% say strong thought leadership makes them more receptive to sales outreach. How can thought leadership serve as that crucial Trojan horse to help reach these otherwise inaccessible audiences?
Right. So I guess because hidden buyers rarely engage with marketing or sales, they're not in the demo, they're probably not signing up for the webinar, they're probably not in the pitch. Reaching them requires a bit of a different strategy. So our research shows that these folks are actively engaging with thought leadership content, and they're really forming opinions about organizations based on what they're reading, learning, discovering, etc. So that means that thought leadership really is a way to build credibility and trust and actually start delivering real value early on, long before any formal outreach has taken place. And what these hidden buyers are telling us in their responses to our survey is that if your content resonates with them, it creates openness to future outreach and ultimately more serious consideration.
Yeah, that's all very interesting, isn't it? But one of the things that I've seen and repeatedly around thought leadership is it tends to be kind of instigated as a brand or even demand generation activity. And often what doesn't happen isn't filter all the way down to the sales team, and the sales team acts in a disconnected way. Whereas actually what you're showing here is that it's really, really powerful to get the sales team on board and get them aligned with these messages and using this stuff, because that's what they're going to respond to much more than, if the marketing's saying one thing and you're going to come in as a sales team and say something else. I mean, that's bad for all sorts of reasons, right?
Right. I mean, the sort of sales marketing divide is something that I think we hear about a lot, and it's something that's very real. But I think there's a couple ways to look at this. So if you are talking about things that are, really top of mind for your target audience in your thought leadership content, that can only help sales down the road, right? Because, that content can sort of take the place of the sales conversation that may not be happening as frequently or as early on, or maybe, never even happening with some of these hidden influencers in the first place. So content can kind of create that bridge and open doors to sales that other types of content may not, or that sales may not even, have available to them in the first place. And I think coming at it from the other direction too, I think sales teams can be a really important input for thought leadership content as well, right? So if you are really trying to create content that dovetails with the challenges or problems that the target audience is having, who is closer to the target audience in sales? They're a perfect conduit to give you insights about what's going on, what's top of mind, and you can use that to actually create content that is going to resonate in the first place. And then actually I think sales is probably going to be more likely to use that content in their conversations as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just a host of reasons why it has to be a kind of joined up funnel end to end, and
Yes.
SL's got involved in that. It's not, and the thought leadership isn't this kind of like something sat on top of an ivory tower which doesn't have any resonance further down. So yeah, it's great to hear that reconfirmed. Talk about trust and credibility. Your findings show that 71% of internal influencers view thought leadership as more effective than traditional marketing materials for demonstrating vendor capabilities. And I guess when we're saying traditional marketing materials, we're probably talking about more generic content marketing type stuff, right? So
more product-focused content,
Yeah.
maybe brand ads, that sort of thing. Things that aren't necessarily insight-led. Yep.
Yeah, exactly. They've not got that kind of uniqueness or differentiation from other kind of more workman type aspects of content. What makes thought leadership particularly powerful for building credibility with these stakeholders?
Yeah, so that 71% stat tells us something that I think is really important. And it tells us that these buyers are looking beyond the polished sales pitch. They really want to see how a company thinks, how it tackles industry challenges, and ultimately whether it has the expertise to be a real partner for them. So thought leadership can do that. It gives target buyers, hidden buyers, hidden influencers, whatever you want to call them, a window into how you think, because it's not just content. It can be credibility as well.
Okay. Advocacy is something which is a really important part of trust in B2B, right? And one of the stats that this report pulls out is saying that 79% of internal influencers are more likely to champion an RFP proposal from companies with strong thought leadership. Can you walk us through how quality content transforms skeptics into advocates with an organization?
Sure. So I think I want to just touch back on something that came up at the beginning of our conversation, which is that stat that 40% of B2B deals stall due to internal misalignment within buying groups. That's a stat, by the way, from a book by Matt Dixon called The Jolt Effect. But that means that a key role for any member of the buying group is to collaborate with the rest of the group and persuade their peers in support of their chosen vendor. And thought leadership is a very valuable tool to help them do that, because it gives them the language, it gives them the insights, it gives them the confidence that they need to champion your brand behind the scenes and in those closed door conversations. So thought leadership, if it's done well, it doesn't just shape one opinion, the opinion of the person who found it or read it. It can ripple across the entire buyer group. And that's something that I think traditional marketing materials, we talked about that a moment ago, but brochures, spec sheets and the like can rarely accomplish. I don't think those things tend to not go viral as much as a really compelling insight or piece of content, as important as they are maybe at other stages of the sales process.
Yeah, it makes sense, doesn't it? If someone's going to want to share something which has got higher aspirational value associated with it. And also kind of linked to that as well, I mean, kind of one of the things you talk about content, you're always talking about format and style, right? So internal influencers, according to your data, show a stronger preference for unique formats, 60% versus 51% for target buyers, with human accessible content over academic deep dive. So again, it's just making this content more human. What does this tell us about how to craft content that resonates with this audience? I guess it's pushing more down that human angle, right?
That's definitely it. I think they want content that stands out from the crowd and that captures their attention. And really, if this person is part of a buying group and they're charged with making a purchasing decision, they're probably doing a lot of homework on multiple vendors and reading a lot of stuff around the internet. So at a certain point, things are probably going to start to look and sound more or less the same, right? I think, Joel, you mentioned like AI content in particular. So that companies who are really conveying their insights through content that's distinctive, that's straightforward, that's human, as you note, that kind of content can inspire hidden buyers to research and learn about them further because it's going to stand out and grab their attention and prompt them to want to learn more.
Yeah, I guess it's the starting point of it, just as you say, understanding that they will be looking at a lot of stuff, and if all the stuff looks the same, it's the stuff that is engaging. I think one of the trends that we pulled out of the B2B Marketing Awards last year was, and perhaps doesn't necessarily apply here, but there's an element of which does. We were seeing, what we described as consumer grade entertainment value. People. So you're actually seeing content coming through in B2B, which is kind of comparable to the stuff you might consume on a streaming channel, or a streaming provider rather, because there's less of that kind of differentiation in terms of expected ways of content consumption you might have had in the past. You don't leave your work self at home and your home self at work. So you have to make it stand out and be as engaging as that kind of stuff might be.
Absolutely. I think the bar is as high as it's ever been. In other words, it's higher to have entertainment value, to stand out, to say something different. So there's style, there's form, there's function. It's what you're saying. And all, I think particularly with the advent of AI created content and against the backdrop that you mentioned, Joel, of all of this, consumer entertainment, it's just important to do things that are going to surprise people, stop them in their tracks, stop them in their scroll. And that's true whether it's B2C, B2B, what people are consuming in their personal life and their work life. I think it's all converging a bit.
We've got to make our technical B2B stuff not technical and actually engaging. So it's a kind of ongoing mission that everyone feels like they know what direction to go in, but sometimes it's hard to actually make that happen. So there's obviously a strong overlap between thought leadership and brand. And another interesting data point from your study shows that 53% of both audiences, presumably that means that's like with the known and the unknown buyers, the influencers, both audiences agree that high quality thought leadership matters more than brand recognition. So that creates an opportunity then for challenger brands. How can lesser known companies leverage this insight to compete against established players?
So that insight is great news for brands who are challengers within a particular category, because it means that smart, well-crafted insights can actually level the playing field for them a bit, that's excellent. Because what hidden buyers are telling us is they're open to considering vendors who aren't a brand name or who aren't a brand name they recognize, who maybe aren't the market leader. But to capitalize on that opportunity, your content really needs to say something interesting, insightful, and worth listening to, and stand out from the crowd, as we talked about a moment ago.
Yeah, it's kind of leveling up, isn't it? Of brands. It's no longer just the global behemoths that are necessarily going to win. If you've got a good story, well told, it creates an opportunity, which is great news for everybody, as you say. So. In terms of the C-suite, the research showed that 41% of target decision makers and 35% of internal influencers have been encouraged by C-suite executives to consider vendors based on their thought leadership. So how does this? So this presumably creates a kind of top-down momentum with these organizations. Is that right?
Absolutely, and I think this is a situation that perhaps many of us can relate to, which is when a senior executive forwards you a piece of content and says, "Let's take a look at this company," or I thought this insight was provocative. Let's look into this further. And that kind of signal from the top carries weight. So for the buyer group, what this does is it shows early interest from leadership in a particular vendor, and it can actually align the group around considering a new possibility in terms of vendor to consider in the RFP process, or to maybe give give another look, right? So that's the kind of downstream influence that strong thought leadership can have when it reaches the C-suite kind of within an organization.
Okay, all right. Now, thank you for that. Now, one of the biggest challenges across B2B marketing is always been measurement and attribution, right? It's the bête noire of B2B often. So, given that internal influencers often operate behind the scenes, how should B2B marketers approach measuring the impact of thought leadership to this audience? And is it possible, first of all? And how do you do it? What metrics actually matter? So, no big deal. And this is not a tough question at all for you, Annie.
Yeah, no, well, it's a tough thing to measure. So, I'm happy to make an attempt, but with these internal influencers, that's a tough thing to measure. And I think that's particularly true because these hidden buyers aren't signaling their interest in a way that target buyers might. They're not attending your webinars. They're not signing up for demos. So that influence is a lot harder to quantify and to measure. I mean, one thought, and this is kind of going, a bit out on a limb, is if your win rate in RFPs is starting to climb, that could be a signal that you're starting to engage the full buyer group, not just your usual targets, and kind of helping them better reach consensus in support of your brand. I mean, that may be a bridge too far, but that's one thought. But at the end of the day, I think that qualitative feedback from sales and anecdotal evidence are what will really matter here. For instance, if there's a salesperson who says they've spoken with someone in one of those hidden buyer functions, and that's not typically a function they, usually have contact with, that could be a kind of signal, really, that qualitative feedback. And I think influence inside organizations generally, and that's really what we're talking about here, that's not something that's easy to measure. A lot of this happens on Slack conversations or Teams, what have you, these internal platforms that, external marketers can't get in there and measure. But I think it can be done if you know what to watch for. And when I say that, I mean not measuring what's happening on companies' internal Slack channels. I mean looking at that qualitative feedback from sales, et cetera, as a proxy for understanding the degree to which you're reaching and influencing those hidden buyers.
Yeah, I guess what it's not going to be in the kind of increasingly post-form world is going to be MQLs, right? And if it was, then you're probably looking in the wrong place. But I mean, if there are various technology companies whose name I won't mention in this call, but who will probably say, well, this is where intent kicks in, right? So if you're using one of those intent providers, and there are lots of providers out there, this is probably where they will be able to demonstrate that you're winning or that you're getting traction. It won't provide you with visibility because I don't think those things can, but it just demonstrates that you're kind of making an impact, I suppose.
Yeah, it could. I think it would be valuable if those hidden buyers are showing those intent signals in the same ways as target buyers are. I don't know that we know that. They may be searching for things as they try to consume content around the internet and do that homework that we talked about. But it may be that that content's just getting passed around internally. It's those internal conversations between the buying group where I think most of the work is happening, at least as we understand it and based on our research.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's in some ways, we've been striving in B2B market to become more measurable and more clear. And what this is kind of saying is you can't, because those important conversations by definition, unless there's someone invents some kind of silver bullet where you're inviting people in, it's going to be very hard to do that. That might be difficult for some people to swallow, right? Can you see that?
Yeah, I think so. And I think it just requires a different approach for these hidden buyers specifically. Intent data, targeted marketing, all of that is super critical for target buyers. And I think to a certain extent, those strategies can and should be used to reach hidden buyers as well, because they are consuming content. They do have LinkedIn. They are searching for things. But I think there's an extra level of those internal conversations within the buying group that require a bit of a different approach to kind of crack. And I think the key there is not necessarily doing things the same way that you're currently doing and trying to measure it in a different way. I think it really fundamentally requires a different approach and creating a different kind of content that's going to address the concerns of that wider range of stakeholders and get them interested in the first place.
Yeah, I guess you're looking for it essentially to go internally viral, aren't you? Right. So you're looking to create something which has such value that it's changing a conversation or defining a conversation a different way. and they will inevitably get shared. So, I always understand you're not saying you shouldn't do all the other things. You've got to carry on doing those things, but this is a new understanding, a new lens of people. Okay. Well, there you go. So you can relax, everyone listening. You don't have to stop doing all the other kinds of marketing, but thought leadership, that's why this is important, that this because it takes this new life and this new virality. Hopefully we kind of talked around the kind of framing of this, whether we describe it as hidden bias or internal influences. There's similar dimensions of dynamics to those individuals. In terms of practicalities, if a B2B marketer listening to this wants to start engaging with these individuals more effectively through thought leadership tomorrow, what would be your top 3 things that you'd recommend they do, or top 1 thing they recommend they do?
Sure. I mean, I can give you 3. They're all related. I think the first is to prioritize hidden buyers as a core audience for your marketing programs from day one, rather than treating them as an afterthought. And we talked about this a moment ago, but it's creating content that will interest the hidden buyer that's really about their business, the business challenges and priorities and the wider business landscape. And that's a way to think about hidden buyers as one of your audiences from the get-go. So that's the first thing. I think the second thing is earning trust through the strength of your insights, not just through your brand name, your taglines, or your logo. And then the third thing is equip hidden buyers to advocate for you. And I think this one is really critical, because if you're arming hidden buyers with the insights they need to bring others within the group along in support of choosing your company, that's really where hidden buyers can become, a real proponent for you and a real advocate for choosing your company. And that third one is particularly important because in B2B, and we've been talking about, buyer groups throughout the conversation, it's not enough to win over just one decision maker. You really need to move the whole group, and thought leadership content is a key way of doing that.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess one of the things for me would be, and just in concept of notwithstanding those 3 points, but also just have a look at what it is you're doing at the moment. Are you generating kind of average content marketing? Or are you generating thought leadership that's genuinely impactful, resonant, unique, differentiated, and got something to say? If you're not doing that, well, it's very unlikely that you're going to be targeting these people who are very hard to identify and reach. I think this study is great because it shines a light on why thought leadership does things which other things can't do. People don't pass on advertising, apart from marketers do, right? Because we like it, but other C-suite people, other people in senior functional roles don't tend to pass on advertising. Unless there's a free offer for beer on there or something like that, I don't know.
Right.
So we've got some practicalities. We've understood. We've kind of framed out what your research shows and why this is important. Thinking about the future, you said earlier on, buyer groups are becoming increasingly complex and distributed. It seems like there's no end to the complexity. How do you see the role of these internal influences or hidden buyers evolving, and what does that mean for our thought leadership strategy going forward?
Yeah. So I think as buyer groups get bigger, as we talked about, and as they include a wider variety of stakeholders to mitigate risk, something we talked about, I think the influence of hidden buyers is only going to grow, right? So hidden buyers, again, those people aren't the technical experts in the product or service. These are the people asking, does this fit our strategy? Can we justify the spend? Can we operationalize this? These are the questions that are top of mind for them. So companies will need to push themselves to create content that resonates with a broader set of priorities than they have in the past, something we touched on. And it's really, it's no longer enough just to use thought leadership to show that you have the technical capabilities and use it to talk about those technical things, because that, those internal influencers aren't product experts, right? You really need to show the caliber of your thinking, the way that your organization thinks about the landscape at large, and ultimately offer a bold, differentiated perspective.
And it's really important what you said there, that it's not saying that technical content is now irrelevant, right?
Not at
because
all.
It still plays a role for those individuals who need to understand the technicalities and the feeds and speeds.
For those target buyers. Yeah,
you've got to have something above that is more broadly resonant and has virality associated with it. So I think it's important. That's why I think this has to be part of it's the big long idea, right? You have to have something at the top which is broadly resonant, and then the other more tactical pieces can sit beneath it. So here we go. I feel like I'm being the guest now. I'm evangelizing about this. So
I welcome it. That's perfect music to my ears. Yeah, thanks, Joel.
Great. Well, Annie, this has been brilliant. I really appreciate you kind of coming on and finding time to talk. And it's a fascinating study. It's showing, I think, anything that puts thought leadership in the spotlight is great. So thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
So thanks, Annie. And if you've enjoyed this conversation and you're interested in the topic of trust and thought leadership and influence in B2B, and why wouldn't you be if you're in B2B? Because this is the number one topic right now. It's a tremendous challenge, but it's also a huge opportunity. Please subscribe to this podcast. I'd really appreciate if you give us a like as well, so that you've enjoyed what you're listening to. But for now, that's all for me for today. So thanks very much for joining us, and I hope you can see us to you again very, very soon. Goodbye.